grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm one of your hosts, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating, not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Hi, it's Jo here. Last year, a series of morning teas highlighting adoptee mental health under the banner of AdopTEA were held around Queensland during Queensland Mental Health Week. All up, 4 peer-supported gatherings of adopted people were registered across Brisbane, the Sunshine Coast and regional Queensland. This year, the AdopTEA events will again take place during Queensland Mental Health Week, which runs from the 8th to the 16th of October. Their aim is to increase awareness and understanding of the impacts of adoption on adopted people and reduce the stigma associated with reaching out and seeking support. Today, I'm joined by the creator of AdopTEA events, Judy Glover. Thank you so much for joining us today, Judy, and telling us all about AdopTEA.
Thanks, Jo. I'm pleased to be here. You know, your podcast is such a wonderful resource for people affected by adoption.
Oh, thank you very much. Judy, I had the pleasure of attending the Brisbane event held at Broncos Leagues Club last year, and it was a great opportunity to share stories and connect. Where did the idea for AdopTEA events come from?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, Jo. I am an adopted person myself. In 2015, I became involved in the post-adoption stakeholders group that was working with the Queensland Government Department of Communities at the time on the Adoption Act legislation review. And that was as a member of the Association for Adoptees. And this led me to be involved in the working committees for the state and federal apology events that we hold here in Queensland for past forced adoption policies and practices, and a few other projects as well with PASC and the Forced Adoption Support Service. Around the same time, I studied a diploma of counselling and began doing individual counselling sessions, mainly with adoptees and also a few mothers. And I facilitated a bi-monthly peer support group for adopted people on the Sunshine Coast with the help of Jigsaw Queensland. And then in 2018, I went to Melbourne to an adoptee roundtable think tank, which was hosted by the late William Hammersley. And the outcome of that meeting is what's now known as Adoptee Rights Australia. And all of this in turn led me to learn more about how the government legislation and policy and practice were affecting the lives of the people who were impacted by adoption. So I began studying a Bachelor of Social Work. And I tell you all of this because whether it was in a counselling setting, support scenario, or when I was in the advocacy space, the loud and clear message I was getting back from adopted people was that they felt unsupported, unheard, and misunderstood.
Right.
And overwhelmingly, they said that as they got older, it got harder.
Yeah.
And while the difficulties and trauma associated with adoption are well recognised within the post-adoption support service community, such as like Jigsaw and PASC, and with the online support groups like the closer Facebook groups for adopted people, outside of that, in the general community and amongst mental and physical healthcare professionals, there is a real lack of awareness and understanding. So when I came across Queensland Mental Health Week last year and saw the range of events that are held each year, I thought it would be a great opportunity to take the issue mainstream. So out of the echo chambers of the adoptee community and get it out into the general community. And just to make more people aware that adoption is not all rainbows and unicorns. There are real issues for the people whose lives have been affected by adoption. And that's when I reached out to Post-Adoption Support Queensland, which is at the Benevolent Society, just to help me turn my thoughts and ideas into what is now the AdopTEA event. And honestly, I couldn't have done it without their help. They were fantastic.
No, it's great. And it's such a great initiative. Do you feel that there is a good understanding about the impacts of adoption in mental health services?
No, I don't, Jo, sadly. A common misconception is that if the adoptee had a happy childhood with their adoptive family, they had a loving family, then they don't and they shouldn't have any issues with their adoption. And, we know that that's just not the case. What adoptees are telling me is that when they go to their GP or to their counsellor or their psychologist, or even speaking with their families or their communities, they're faced with this lack of awareness or understanding that their adoption was having an impact on their lives, on both their physical and their mental health. And even if there is an adoption, an acknowledgement that adoption has challenges, the majority of mental health professionals, they just don't have the skills or the knowledge to be able to help adoptees effectively.
Yeah.
And that has real consequences for the adoptees reaching out for support. And one thing that was very obvious in my studies was the lack of research in Australia into the lived experience and the impacts of adoption upon adopted people right across their lifespan, not just as children, but how it impacts them as adults as well. And, while there's a lot of research done overseas into the mental and physical health of adoptees and, all showing much poorer outcomes for the non-adopted person, than for adoptees and a non-adopted person, there's not much in the way of peer-reviewed research here in Australia.
Yeah.
And, what I've learned is it's vital to have that research to make sure that the support needs of the people affected by adoption are adequately funded by government. That's how government funding is, comes about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So with one of the main aims of the gatherings being to raise awareness, what would you like people to know about the realities of adoption and its impact on adopted people?
Well, as I touched on before, Jo, there's this general view in the community that if an adoptee had a happy childhood and loving adoptive parents, then they shouldn't be affected by adoption. And in fact, they should be grateful to their adoptive parents for giving them a home and providing for them. It's this narrative we hear all the time. And this attempt at gaslighting adoptees, so denying the reality for adopted people, it fails to recognise the different events at the start of an adoptee's life, that their birth is one event, and then there's this gap of time, and then their adoption is a different event.
Right.
So for adoptees that were born into the closed and forced adoption era, most likely their mother, was unmarried, and she would have been sent away by her parents to an unmarried mother's home or, some equally distressing situation. And, research now shows us that the stress hormones of the mother affect the development of the nervous system of the baby in utero. And the vast majority of babies taken at birth, were taken at birth or very soon after birth from their mother in our generation.
Yeah.
And in research terms, this is called neonatal maternal separation. And it's been shown to alter the DNA and nervous system of the baby. And that has lifelong consequences on the mental health and the gut health, which can be triggered at any age, right through to late adulthood. And
absolutely.
our gut health is also involved in depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this took place even before the baby met their adoptive parents. We're talking about two different things here, two completely different events in that child's life, one being separated from their mother and their father and their family, and then secondly being adopted into another family. However, they are so often conflated together into the one idea of being adopted. And, there may have been days or weeks or months between those two events. And most adoptees don't really know what happened to them during that time. They could have been kept at the hospital or sent to an orphanage, but they probably didn't have consistency of one caregiver during that time, which, that lack of nurturing can lead to attachment issues as well.
Yeah.
And when that baby is adopted and meets their adoptive parents for the first time, they are essentially strangers. And, it takes time for the baby to become familiar and comfortable with their adoptive family and build that trust and love. And while at the same time they're doing that, they're grieving the loss of their mother, their first mother.
Mm-hmm.
But the new adoptive parents, they were led to believe that the baby they received was this blank slate, that the baby doesn't know anything about this. So, they were often ill-equipped to support their adoptive child through this grieving process or what comes afterwards. In fact, in his video, Dr. Paul Sunderland tells how babies recognise their mother's voice right from the third trimester of pregnancy, and that the research he talks about shows that a baby can distinguish their own mother's voice and smell from any other person right from birth. They know who their mother is. So when the baby loses their mother at birth, it's traumatic for them, and they go into that fight, flight, freeze response. And the baby experiences that loss of the mother as life-threatening, because essentially it is. Babies are born helpless, and instinctively they know that they need their mother.
Yeah.
Dr. Sunderland, he calls this a trauma that it can be remembered but not recalled. And that's because it happened to the baby pre-verbally, before their prefrontal cortex came online, and that they were had the ability of cognitive thought, which happens at about 2 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
So often these thoughts and feelings that come up for adoptees, they don't have words for them because it happened pre-verbally. All this stuff happened before they had words. So as an adult, the adoptee can't find words.
Yeah.
So when that baby meets her adoptive family, they've already been through so much, and if they have a loving adoptive family and a happy childhood, it doesn't wipe out that start of the person's life. It doesn't make it disappear. It still happened, and it needs to be recognised and acknowledged and dealt with. In fact, Nancy Verrier, in her book, The Primal Wound, she quotes that, she believes a more appropriate question to be, why wouldn't the separation from the mother to whom, the baby was connected for 9 months affect the infant?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I was just thinking about is you're saying that all of that, if you're a late discovery adopted person too, you don't even have like the knowledge, the after knowledge that something happened. So all these things are going on, you have absolutely no idea why they're happening.
Exactly. Yeah, it's still going on within the person, but they have no context to put it into.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the adoptee gatherings are primarily, I couldn't get that word out, are primarily for adopted people to connect, share and learn. However, there is also an opportunity to educate the public about the impacts of adoption. Are you hoping to see some events that take an informative approach for the wider community?
Yes, Jo, that is certainly one of the hopes for the adoptee. Last year, there were adoptee events held by Post-Adoption Support Queensland at the Benevolent Society and by the Link Up Service and the Adoption and Permanent Care Service Department of the Queensland Government. And, they were forums for those organisations to share practice, knowledge and experience in supporting people affected by adoption. And there was some great feedback from those events last year.
Yeah.
But additionally, by having these events public, it's an option, an opportunity for non-adoptees to hear from adoptees themselves about what it's like to live as an adopted person. Often it's not talked about, can be a bit of a taboo subject, so it's a great opportunity to get the word out there to a wider audience. And that's certainly our hope.
Yeah. So for anyone who's considering hosting an event, who might be struggling to think of how to go about it, sometimes that's enough to put people off. Can you give us some ideas of what they might consider doing?
Yeah, sure, Jo. An adoptee doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as getting a few people together around your kitchen table, or just meet, for a picnic in the park. Last year there was an event held at the RSL Club on the Sunshine Coast, where they just reserved some tables and brought along a cake to share. And, that was a huge success, that event. At another event, a mother had a table outside her workplace where she spoke with all the passers-by about adoption. And that's another point too. You don't necessarily need to be an adoptee. That was a mother hosting a group as well, and you're hosting an adoptee as well.
Yeah.
And excuse me. And, myself along with another adoptee, Colleen, we held a morning tea at the Broncos Leagues Club here in Brisbane last year, which is the one you came along to, Jo.
Yeah.
And which we're doing again this year.
Yeah.
And again, that was...
So I was going to say, what was fantastic about that too is there was so many different people and different experiences there. We had intercountry adoptees, we had older adoptees, we had younger adoptees, we had mothers there. I mean, it was just fantastic. And plus spouses of some people came along as well.
Yeah, indeed. It's for everyone. It's not just for adoptees. You're quite welcome to bring along, family and support people and... and just learn from each other, just connect and share and form that community and learn from each other. Yeah. So, it really can be whatever you want it to be. As I said, the idea is just getting adoptees together to connect and share their stories.
Yeah, fantastic. So how can people find out more or become involved or register to host or attend an adoptee event?
Jo, the easiest way is to go to the Post-Adoption Support Queensland website. They've come on board again this year to support the events, and a huge thank you to them again. They have a page on their website, as well as there's a Facebook page specifically called the AdopTEA set up for that. That's where you can register your interest in holding an adoptee event, and when you do, you'll be emailed a resource pack from PASC with tips for planning your adoptee. It's got an invitation template in there and lots of other resources that you might find helpful.
Excellent. Thanks to PASC for doing that. So have you got any events already registered?
We do, yes. As I said, Colleen and I are hosting an adoptee here in Brisbane again on Sunday the 16th of October. So all the details for that will be on the AdopTEA Facebook page. We do ask that people RSVP for catering purposes,
absolutely,
as we would for any of the events.
Yeah.
And I know the Benevolent Society is again having an event for like an educational event for their professional networks. So yeah, that's one that's definitely coming up too.
Excellent.
So we're just getting it off the ground at the moment for this year. So as the adoptee events are registered with PASC, they will be added to the Facebook page. So, check back regularly to see if there's one in, the areas close to you. And if there's not one close by, I highly encourage people to considering holding an adoptee of their own. Having said that, if you choose to hold an adoptee and you want it private, that's okay too. You can still contact PASC to get their resource pack to help you, but you can let them know that you don't want the event to be listed publicly, or you can ask for your address and things not to be listed publicly. That's quite okay too.
Yeah. I'm just thinking actually, if you lived in regional Queensland and you don't know many people impacted by adoption in your area, hosting something like this and putting it on your community pages to let people know that it's happening could be a really great way to connect with people in your community that you didn't even know.
Absolutely, Jo. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're hoping is these events will bring people together so that adoptees don't feel so isolated, and gives them that opportunity to talk about what's happened to them and, make those connections with other adoptees, whose stories might be quite similar. And so you don't feel so alone within this. Yeah.
Well, Judy, thank you so much for telling us about AdopTEA today. As I said, it is a fantastic initiative. So thank you so much for putting all this work into creating it and getting it together. We need people like you who are willing to not just talk about things, but do things and get them going. So thank you so much for that. And I'll be looking forward to attending the Brisbane event myself.
Great.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. And I will pop up the relevant links that Judy was talking about on our podcast notes page too. So that's one place you can go to find all of the links that you need if you can't find them on your own. And meanwhile, do you have a story that you'd like to share with us? If you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And please note that Adopt Perspective can be listened to by people all over the world. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 21 0313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you are calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.